Thank you, Kenneth. My weekend was busy. Went up to Baton Rouge and saw LSU in Washington on Saturday night, and then was at the Superdome yesterday for the other Washington, which didn't turn out so good on a Sunday. LSU was outstanding on Saturday night. Washington's longest gain was 22 yards. So, you know, it's pretty amazing when you can lose two first-team All-American cornerbacks, one to the draft and one to a dismissal, and still hold the team to 3 yards of play, 183 total yards on 60 snaps. Pretty amazing stuff. So, you know, I'm looking at the polls here, and I guess the winner of USC and Oregon will play the winner of LSU Alabama for the national championship. What is it, September 10th? So, you know, there's a lot of football left to be played. We really don't know what's going to happen, but anyone who's going to play against LSU is going to have a really hard time moving the football. And of course, we all know we were waiting in the tunnel to go into the locker room on Saturday, and we found out what happened to Arkansas against UL Monroe. That was not pretty. So Arkansas's got some issues, and I know they were a team that was thought to be in the championship race, and now they're not even in the top 25. So a lot of crazy stuff happened already on Saturday. As far as Sunday is concerned, Saints played bad, but I think they'll turn it around. But I think they have one big concern, and I just left Aaron Cromer's press conference a little while ago, and I asked him about the Redskins playing a lot of man coverage, which is something they did, and I think the Saints are going to see a lot of that. Devery Henderson is hurt. We don't know of his availability. They wouldn't say anything about whether he's going to be available this weekend. Won't announce that till Wednesday. And of course, Robert Meacham isn't here anymore. So I think the Saints' lack of a bona fide deep threat is going to make defenses a little bit more ambitious as far as their desire to take away the underneath stuff and force the Saints to try to make some plays over the top. So we'll see how they adjust this week at Carolina. There's no doubt that the Saints will see a share of that. They'll look at the Washington game tape, will Carolina, and figure out, you know, what can we implement that the Redskins did very well. As far as the offense is concerned, I think it was kind of ridiculous in a game that Pierre Thomas gets five touches, 4 rush and one pass. So as far as I'm concerned, Pierre Thomas is their best back. He's a really good runner, very hard runner, runs through tackles, very good as a pass receiver and in the screen game, and he got 5 touches. So I know they talked about the penalties being a big issue as far as continuing to throw the football, but if you look at the first series, it was 3 incompletes and a punt. And if you go to the third series, it was 2 incompletes, and then 3rd and 10, they got 2 back-to-back false start penalties. So I'm not so sure I agree with all of that reasoning. Defensively, you know, Saints have a lot of improving to do there. The one thing I would say about them on defense right now is that, you know, I don't care what defense you're playing. If you don't have a lot of elite athletes, it's going to be tough. I think they've got a lot of good players. I don't know if they have a great player on defense. So with that said, you're not as good as they say you are, and you're not as bad as they say you are. I think the truth is somewhere in between. But here's the truth on Sunday. Either the Saints or the Panthers are going to be 0-2. And, you know, Saints come home and play Kansas City, but then they've got to go to Green Bay. And I thought it was very important for them to make hay in September and to win some games early to get some confidence and set themselves up for the stretch. So they don't want to get too far behind too early. And if they don't play well on Sunday, you know, that's certainly a possibility. Remember last year, they went to Carolina, and I think they won by 3 and had to rally to do that. So the Panthers are always a tough out for them. So it'll be a very interesting game on Sunday, and we'll see if the Saints can bounce back. I think they can, but it's not going to be easy. Any questions? No one? Well, good. I'm going to go get something to eat then. What about Tulane? Well, we all know what happened on Saturday. Very sad. And we certainly hope that the young man can make a complete recovery and he can walk again. And I think that's the number one concern right now. As far as their football team, they're starting over. And he's playing a lot of his players. And I frankly do not think this year is going to be pretty. I hope it gets better. But it's going to be tough sledding here. Tough sledding. Yes, sir.
What do you think is going to happen with the honey badger? You know, you think he's...
Well, you know, I think he wants to come back to school. I mean, he's in school, but I don't think he wants to come back to the football team. The only thing I would say is, how do you bring him back if he's permanently ineligible? I was there that day. Is his dismissal permanent? Yes, it's permanent. I don't know how that happens. Somebody's going to have to explain that to me. But there's no question that by coming back to school, he wants the option of A, going to the NFL draft, or B, returning to LSU. My deal is this. I don't think he's going to help his draft stock by coming back. I think wherever his draft stock is now, because of all the things that have transpired, is going to be his draft stock in a year. Plus, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but what happens if he has a relapse? What does LSU do at that point? So I think that's why they're keeping quiet. They're not going to say anything about it, and we'll probably know something early next year.
Eliminate any possibility of playing for a different school because
he's enrolled in school. That's it for right now.
So in other words, he can't sit out a year because now this year doesn't count as a sit-out year.
No, it does count as a sit-out year. He played his first 2 years, so technically he could redshirt this year, and you have 5 to complete 4 unless you get a medical a redshirt. So he could transfer somewhere else next year and be eligible. But I don't see that. I think he's going to either play for LSU or go to the NFL draft. I think the NFL draft is more likely. Yes, sir.
You talked about Pierre Thomas. What do you think about Mark Ingram? It just seems like to me they're forcing carries for him and taking away carries from Pierre Thomas.
Well, I think so far Mark Ingram has been a disappointment. Now, he's been hurt, and I think you have to be fair about it. He had a pretty serious toe injury last year, and I think that really created a problem for Mark Ingram. But at this point, I agree with you. I think Pierre Thomas is their best back. And I think they've got to get him involved in the downhill running game. And that's how you get play-action passing going. You know, look, in 2008, the Saints threw the ball all over the place. But they weren't very good because they didn't have a running game. And, you know, I know you had penalties yesterday, but you ran the ball 10 times. So I think Pierre Thomas has got to be a bigger part of the game plan. Anybody else? In the back. All right,
yeah.
Stan, go ahead.
Ed, you're great with the Friday night football, the high school football. What do you see the Catholic League, the Brother Martin, the Rummel, the Jesuit, the St. Paul's? I mean, right now, they don't look as strong as they have pre-Katrina. Is that going to happen? Are there going to be mergers of Catholic schools, do you think, in the future, or what's going to happen to the Catholic League?
Okay, number one, St. Paul's is in that North Shore League, and I think they're going to win that league. I think St. Paul's is going to win the North Shore League. They're still real good. You got to remember they played John Curtis and Lincoln, Florida, in their first 2 games, and I think Lincoln was better than Plant, to be honest with you. I saw both games. I saw one on television, one in person. I had to leave and go back to the studio. I thought Lincoln was pretty good. I thought Plant shot their mouths off a lot, but you know, they kind of got a little answer there, you know. But as far as the Catholic League is concerned, I think Rummel will win the Catholic League this year. I think St. Aug will probably win it next year, because I think they're going to be back in the league next year, and they're real good. And I think it'll be Rummel, Brother Martin, Jesuit, Shaw, Holy Cross, and St. Aug all back together again next year. Remember, the rules change in the LHSAA. If you have Class 4A enrollment, you can play up 1 class. So Shaw's already said they're not going to have the enrollment, but they're going to play up. So I think you're going to see the South Shore Catholic League back together again. And as far as St. Paul's is concerned, maybe they're not as good as they were last year, but I think it's a little early to tell that based on the competition that they played. Yes, sir, Mr. Pistorius.
Ed, what time does Friday Night Football come on ABC 26, and is it also simulcast on a couple of radio stations in the New Orleans area also?
On WGSO, and is it SLA, Kenny? And WSLA. Yep. 990 and 1560. And it's 11:02, Randy. Set your clock. Be on time. Peyton Manning, pretty special last night, huh? Yes, sir.
I have two questions real quick. Did Aaron Cromer say any reason why Akeem Hicks did not dress or play? I thought he was probably the best defensive tackle we had in the preseason. And my other question is, since the Saints won the Super Bowl in 2009, 2010, 2011, the Saints were known as a team with a lot of depth. I look at this team now, I just don't see it anywhere, maybe except running back. But when you look at cornerback, offensive line, defensive line, we just don't have that depth that we had 2 years ago after winning the Super Bowl.
Well, what happens after you win the Super Bowl is all your stars get big contracts. And losing Carl Nicks, I watched him open a few holes for Doug Martin yesterday. I was back in my office last night about 11:45 looking at some of that game that I DVR'd, and he opened some big holes yesterday. And Tracy Porter had a pick 6 last night. So I think those are two guys they definitely miss, and they definitely miss Meacham. But here's the thing, they couldn't afford them. You want to keep those 3 guys and let Breeze go, you can afford them. What would you like to do? That's the dilemma the Saints had because of the salary cap. And I wrote about that about a month ago on Kenny's website, sportsnola.com. And that's not a criticism. I think the Saints did the best they could based on where they were against the number. But there's no doubt that that's an issue. And that's why it's so hard to be consistently good. So it may take them a year or two. And, you know, I'm not writing off anything, but it might take them a year or two to retool again. You know, and one thing that hurt them too is they didn't have a second-round pick because of the bounty. They didn't have a first-round pick because of Mark Ingram. So if you're asking me if I think they're as good as they were last year, I didn't think they were, and I don't think they are. Yes, sir.
The false starts, the defensive offsides, and especially the 12th man on defense. To me, I think that's a sign of Coach Payton not be there. Is there not that voice in the locker room that's going to keep these guys more mentally prepared?
That's a good point. You know, I wrote about that in my Clarion Herald column that'll be out on Sunday. I can remember when Jamal Brown would get a false start, and there were many. He would come off to the sideline, and Sean Payton would be in his face. And there would be some immediate accountability. And I don't know, maybe that's not the style of the other guys, and maybe because they're not the head coach, they're the interim head coach. I think it's a little bit of a different field. But I think, you know, one of the bad things about Sean Payton at times is that he's confrontational. But I think that's one of the good things about Sean Payton too, is that he is confrontational. I think that's part of his strength as far as being the boss. And you know, I'm not saying I disagree with you. Anybody else? Yes, sir. Peyton's comeback looked pretty good, didn't he? Yeah, one of the guys in my fantasy league picked him like 6th or 7th, and I thought he was out of his mind. I thought he was on something, but he might be on to something instead, you know. Peyton Manning did a pretty good job last night. But the one thing that I think is a little different for him is I don't know if he has a supporting cast around him. You know, for a lot of his years, he's throwing to Reggie Wayne and Marvin Harrison and Dallas Clark, and I'm not knocking Peyton. Those guys were all good players around him, though. Handing to a die, you know, handing to Edgerrin James. I think one thing that Denver's going to have to do is, in the future, as early as next year, is try to assemble a better cast around him. But considering where he was and the fact that he missed the whole year, and to play at that level last night was pretty special. Anybody else? Well, I want to let you know that this is kind of like church. This fulfills my holy day of obligation here. So I will not be back later this year. And if you would please remind Mr. Trahan of that, I'm only kidding. If he needs me to come back later, I will.